The year is 1185, and across the misty mountains of feudal Japan, a warrior class emerges that will define honor, discipline, and martial prowess for nearly 7 centuries. Tonight, as you drift into peaceful slumber, let me guide you through the complete and extraordinary saga of the samurai, from their humble beginnings as provincial guards to their transformation into the most revered warrior class in human history. Picture yourself walking through ancient Kyoto at dawn, where cherry blossoms fall like snow across cobblestone paths, and the distant sound of temple bells echoes through valleys shrouded in morning fog. This is the world where our story begins, a world where loyalty meant everything, where a single sword could determine the fate of entire provinces, and where the way of the warrior would become a philosophy that transcends mere combat to touch the very soul of what it means to live with purpose and die with honor. The samurai story spans almost 800 years of Japanese history, encompassing periods of brutal civil war, cultural renaissance, foreign invasion, political intrigue, and ultimately, a peaceful transformation that would reshape an entire civilization. From the Heian period's elegant court culture, through the violent Sengoku era's constant warfare, to the peaceful Edo period's administrative governance, and finally to the Meiji Restoration's dramatic modernization, the samurai adapted, evolved, and left an indelible mark on world history that resonates even today. What makes this journey particularly fascinating is how the samurai were never just warriors. They were poets who composed haiku before battle, administrators who governed provinces with wisdom, artists who perfected the tea ceremony, philosophers who developed ethical codes that influenced millions, and innovators who embraced new technologies while maintaining ancient traditions. Their story is humanity's story, told through the lens of those who chose to live by principles larger than themselves. As we embark on this comprehensive exploration together, you'll discover how a group of mounted archers in provincial Japan evolved into legendary figures whose influence extended far beyond the battlefield. You'll learn about their daily rituals, their spiritual practices, their family structures, their economic systems, and their profound impact on Japanese culture, politics, and society. More importantly, you'll understand how their philosophy of Bushido, the way of the warrior, created a moral framework that continues to inspire people worldwide. The origins of the samurai trace back to the late Heian period, roughly between 794 and 1185, when Japan was experiencing a fascinating transformation from Chinese-influenced court culture to a distinctly Japanese identity. During this era, the imperial court in Kyoto held nominal power, but real authority was increasingly shifting to provincial landowners and military families who controlled vast estates across the archipelago. The word samurai itself derives from the verb saburao, meaning to serve, reflecting their original role as attendants to the nobility. These early warriors were not the romanticized figures of later periods, but practical men who served local lords, collected taxes, maintained order, and defended territory against bandits and rival clans. They were essentially armed retainers who combined administrative duties with military responsibilities, creating a unique fusion of civil and martial authority that would define their class for centuries. The geographic reality of Japan played a crucial role in shaping samurai culture. The mountainous terrain, numerous islands, and scattered population centers created natural boundaries that fostered the development of semi-autonomous regions ruled by local strongmen. Unlike the centralized monarchies of Europe or the vast empires of China, Japan's landscape encouraged the emergence of multiple power centers, each requiring its own military force for protection and expansion. During the mid-Heian period, 2 particular families began to dominate the emerging warrior class: the Minamoto and the Taira. These clans traced their lineages to imperial princes who had been granted surnames and sent to the provinces to establish their own power bases. The Minamoto clan, also known as the Genji, established themselves primarily in the Kanto region around modern-day Tokyo, while the Taira clan, known as the Heiki, built their strength in the western provinces and maintained closer ties to the imperial court. The rise of these military families coincided with significant changes in Japanese society and technology. The introduction of the curved sword, or tachi, from the mainland revolutionized warfare by providing mounted warriors with a more effective cutting weapon. The development of improved armor, particularly the distinctive lamella construction that would become iconic samurai gear, offered better protection while maintaining mobility for horseback combat. Equally important was the evolution of the IE system, the extended family structure that became the foundation of samurai organization. Unlike Western feudalism, which was based primarily on land tenure, Japanese feudalism incorporated complex kinship networks that bound warriors together through blood relations, adoptions, and marriage alliances. This system created incredibly strong bonds of loyalty and mutual obligation that extended far beyond simple military service. The samurai's relationship with Buddhism also began during this formative period. While the imperial court had long embraced Buddhism alongside native Shinto beliefs, the warrior class developed a particularly close connection to Zen Buddhism, which emphasized discipline, meditation, and the acceptance of death. This spiritual dimension would become integral to samurai identity, providing both practical training for warfare and philosophical frameworks for understanding duty, sacrifice, and the impermanence of life. The economic foundations of early samurai power rested on the shuen system, a complex arrangement of tax-exempt estates that had developed throughout the Heian period. Local warriors often served as estate managers or protectors for these lands, which were nominally owned by court nobles or religious institutions, but effectively controlled by the military families who administered them. This system provided the economic base necessary to support professional warriors, while creating networks of obligation and dependence that transcended simple employer-employee relationships. Training for warfare began early in samurai families. Young boys started learning horsemanship, archery, and swordsmanship as soon as they could hold weapons, but their education extended far beyond martial skills. They studied Chinese classics, practiced calligraphy, learned poetry composition, and received instruction in proper etiquette and administrative procedures. This comprehensive education reflected the samurai's dual role as both warriors and administrators, preparing them for the complex responsibilities they would assume as adults. The Genpei War, which erupted between the Minamoto and Taira clans from 1180 to 1185, marked the definitive transition from imperial to military rule in Japan. This conflict arose from a succession dispute within the imperial family, but quickly evolved into a struggle for supreme military authority that would reshape Japanese political structure permanently. The war began when Prince Mochihito, supported by the Minamoto clan, challenged the Taira-backed Emperor Antoku. Initial Taira advantages, including their control of the imperial court and superior naval capabilities, seemed to ensure victory. However, the Minamoto clan's strength in the eastern provinces and their exceptional military leadership, particularly under Minamoto no Yoritomo and his younger brother Yoshitsune, gradually turned the tide. The conflict showcased the evolving nature of samurai warfare and tactics. Early engagements relied heavily on traditional mounted archery, with warriors calling out their names and lineages before engaging in individual combat. However, as the war progressed, commanders increasingly emphasized coordinated group tactics, strategic positioning, and the effective use of terrain advantages over ritualized single combat. Minamoto no Yoshitsune emerged as perhaps the most brilliant military tactician of the war, demonstrating innovative strategies that would influence samurai warfare for generations. His surprise attack at Ichi no Tani, where he led cavalry down a supposedly impossible cliff face to strike the Taira camp from behind, exemplified the kind of bold, unconventional thinking that characterize the best samurai commanders. The decisive naval battle of Dan no Ura in 1185 effectively ended both the war and the Taira clan's power. Facing inevitable defeat, the Taira leadership, including the child Emperor Antoku, chose death over dishonor by drowning themselves in the inland sea. This tragic conclusion established important precedents about samurai attitudes toward honor, defeat, and death that would resonate throughout their history. Minamoto no Yoritomo's victory established the first true military government in Japanese history, known as the Kamakura Bakufu. Unlike previous arrangements where military families served court nobles, Yoritomo created an independent power structure based in Kamakura that operated parallel to, but separate from, the imperial court in Kyoto. This dual structure of authority, with emperors maintaining ceremonial and religious functions, while military leaders held practical political power, would characterize Japanese government for the next 7 centuries. The establishment of the Kamakura Bakufu marked the beginning of what historians call the medieval period in Japanese history, an era when samurai culture would develop its most distinctive characteristics. Yoritomo's government created new institutions specifically designed to serve military needs and warrior values, including the samurai dokoro for military administration, the mandokoro for general administration, and the monchujo for judicial affairs. The establishment of these institutions represented more than administrative convenience. They embodied a fundamental shift in how Japanese society conceptualized authority and governance. Under Yoritomo's system, loyalty flowed upward through clearly defined hierarchical channels, while protection and rewards flowed downward. This created a web of mutual obligations that bound the entire warrior class together in a complex network of service and responsibility. The position of shogun, which Yoritomo formally received from the emperor in 1192, became the ultimate symbol of legitimate military authority in Japan. The title itself, meaning barbarian subduing generalissimo, had ancient precedents but took on entirely new meaning under the Kamakura system. The shogun ruled not as a usurper of imperial power, but as the emperor's deputy in military matters, maintaining the fiction of imperial supremacy while exercising real political control. This delicate balance between imperial tradition and military reality became a defining characteristic of Japanese political culture. The emperor remained the source of legitimacy and the focus of religious authority, while the shogun handled practical governance and military affairs. This arrangement satisfied both the need for effective leadership and the deep-seated reverence for imperial lineage that permeated Japanese society. The land tenure system that developed under Kamakura rule established the economic foundations that would support samurai culture for centuries. Warriors received grants of land, known as fiefs, in exchange for military service and administrative duties. However, these grants differed significantly from European feudalism in their complexity and flexibility. Samurai often held multiple small parcels scattered across different provinces, creating intricate networks of obligation that prevented the concentration of regional power that might threaten central authority. The concept of gokenin, or direct vassals of the shogun, created an elite tier within the samurai class that served as the backbone of military government. These warriors owed their positions directly to the shogun rather than to intermediate lords, ensuring their primary loyalty remained with the central military authority. This system of direct vassalage created a professional military class whose interests aligned with maintaining the stability and strength of the Bakufu government. Training and education within samurai families became increasingly systematized during the Kamakura period. The development of formal schools for military arts, combined with the refinement of fighting techniques and the codification of a proper warrior behavior, created standardized approaches to samurai development that ensured consistency across the class. Young samurai learned not only martial skills, but also the administrative capabilities necessary for governing their territories effectively. The spiritual dimensions of samurai life deepened significantly during this period as well. The relationship between Zen Buddhism and warrior culture intensified, with many prominent temples serving as centers for both religious practice and military training. The emphasis on discipline, meditation, and the acceptance of death that characterized Zen philosophy provided samurai with mental and spiritual tools that enhanced their effectiveness as both warriors and administrators. The role of women within samurai society during the Kamakura period deserves particular attention, as it differed markedly from later developments. Female members of warrior families often received military training and could inherit property and political positions. Some women achieved remarkable prominence as military leaders or administrators, demonstrating that early samurai culture possessed greater flexibility regarding gender roles than would characterize later periods. The Hojo clan's emergence as the dominant force behind Kamakura government illustrates the complex political dynamics that characterized medieval Japanese politics. Originally minor vassals of the Minamoto, the Hojo family gained control of the Bakufu through strategic marriages, political maneuvering, and their position as regents for successive shoguns. Their ability to maintain power for over a century while technically serving as regents rather than rulers themselves demonstrates the sophisticated understanding of legitimacy and authority that characterized Japanese political culture. Under Hojo leadership, the Kamakura government faced its greatest test when the Mongol Empire, having conquered China and Korea, turned its attention toward Japan. The attempted invasions of 1274 and 1281 represented the first foreign military threat Japan had faced since its emergence as a unified state, and the samurai response to this challenge would have profound implications for their development as a warrior class. The first Mongol invasion fleet, carrying approximately 30,000 troops, landed on the beaches of northern Kyushu in late 1274. The samurai defenders, accustomed to individual combat and formal challenges between warriors, found themselves facing massed formations of disciplined troops using coordinated tactics and unfamiliar weapons, including explosive projectiles. The initial encounters revealed significant differences between Japanese and continental approaches to warfare that forced rapid adaptations in samurai fighting methods. Despite their initial surprise at Mongol tactics, the samurai demonstrated remarkable adaptability and courage under fire. Local defenders, led by families like the Shoni and Otomo, organized effective resistance that prevented the invaders from establishing secure beachheads. The combination of fierce samurai resistance and a devastating storm that destroyed much of the Mongol fleet forced the withdrawal of the invasion force after only a few days of fighting. The 7-year interval between invasions provided crucial time for military preparation and strategic planning. The Hojo government ordered the construction of massive stone walls along the Kyushu coastline, creating defensive positions that would channel future invasion forces into predetermined killing zones. These fortifications represented a significant departure from traditional Japanese military architecture, reflecting lessons learned from the first invasion about the importance of defensive positioning against massed enemy forces. The second invasion of 1281 involved a much larger force, with estimates suggesting over 140,000 troops transported in 2 separate fleets that were to converge on Kyushu simultaneously. The scale of this operation represented one of the largest amphibious invasions in medieval military history, demonstrating the Mongol Empire's commitment to conquering Japan and incorporating it into their expanding domain. The improved Japanese defenses and refined tactics proved highly effective against the second invasion. The stone walls channeled Mongol forces into confined areas where samurai could engage them on more favorable terms, while coordinated night raids and small boat attacks harassed the invasion fleets and prevented them from establishing secure supply lines. The defenders had learned to combine their traditional fighting skills with new tactical approaches better suited to large-scale warfare. The legendary kamikaze, or divine wind, that destroyed much of the second Mongol fleet has become central to Japanese cultural memory of these invasions. While the typhoon that struck the invasion force was indeed catastrophic for the Mongols, the samurai resistance had already proven effective in preventing the establishment of secure footholds on Japanese territory. The storm thus provided the final blow to an invasion that was already struggling against determined and well-prepared defenders. The successful defense against the Mongol invasions had profound psychological and cultural impacts on samurai society. The experience of facing a foreign enemy that threatened the entire nation created a sense of shared purpose and national identity that transcended traditional clan loyalties. The notion that Japan was protected by divine intervention, combined with pride in their military prowess, fostered a sense of cultural superiority and divine destiny that would influence Japanese attitudes toward the outside world for centuries. However, the economic costs of maintaining constant military readiness and the extensive coastal fortifications placed enormous strains on the Kamakura government's resources. Unlike traditional warfare between Japanese clans, which typically resulted in the redistribution of defeated enemies' lands among victorious warriors, the Mongol invasions produced no territorial gains or economic rewards for the defending samurai. This created financial pressures that gradually undermined the stability of the military government. The changing nature of warfare revealed by the Mongol invasions also accelerated developments in samurai military technology and tactics. The exposure to continental weapons and fighting methods led to innovations in armor design, weapons development, and battlefield organization that enhanced the effectiveness of Japanese warriors. These military innovations would prove crucial during the subsequent periods of civil warfare that characterized the late medieval period. As the 13th century drew to a close, the samurai had successfully established themselves as Japan's dominant political and military force, while demonstrating their ability to defend the nation against foreign threats. The institutions created during the Kamakura period provided the framework for samurai governance, while the military experiences of the era shaped their tactical development and cultural identity. The stage was now set for the next phase of samurai evolution, as internal political pressures and changing social conditions would soon challenge the stability of the military government and lead to new conflicts that would further define the warrior class. The 14th century dawned with the samurai class facing unprecedented internal tensions that would ultimately reshape their entire social and political order. The financial strains created by the Mongol defense preparations had created deep fissures within the warrior hierarchy, as many samurai found themselves impoverished despite their heroic service to the nation. The traditional reward system, based on redistributing conquered lands among victorious warriors, had proven inadequate when victory produced no new territories to distribute. Emperor Go-Daigo seized upon these growing discontent to launch an ambitious attempt to restore direct imperial rule, initiating what historians call the Kemu Restoration of 1333. This remarkable emperor possessed both the political acumen and charismatic leadership necessary to unite diverse opposition forces against the Kamakura Bakufu, including disaffected samurai, powerful Buddhist monasteries, and regional strongmen who had grown weary of Hojo domination. The emperor's rebellion revealed the complex loyalties that characterized samurai society during this pivotal period. Many warriors found themselves torn between their traditional obligations to the military government and their deeper reverence for imperial authority. This internal conflict manifested most dramatically in the defection of Ashikaga Takauji, one of the Bakufu's most trusted generals, who abandoned his mission to suppress the imperial rebellion and instead joined Go-Daigo's cause. Ashikaga Takauji emerged as the most significant military leader of this chaotic period, demonstrating the kind of strategic brilliance and political adaptability that defined successful samurai commanders. His decision to switch sides during the siege of Kyoto effectively doomed the Kamakura government, but his subsequent relationship with Emperor Go-Daigo proved far more complex than simple loyalty or opportunism. The fall of Kamakura in 1333 marked the end of the first military government and initiated a period of unprecedented political experimentation. Emperor Go-Daigo's attempts to govern directly through restored imperial institutions initially appeared successful, as the emperor implemented administrative reforms designed to centralize authority while reducing the power of military families. However, these reforms ultimately failed to address the fundamental economic and social changes that had occurred during nearly 2 centuries of military rule. The warrior class had become too entrenched in Japanese society to simply return to their previous subordinate status. Local samurai had developed sophisticated administrative capabilities and economic interests that made them indispensable for effective governance. Moreover, the military technologies and organizational structures that had evolved during the Kamakura period could not simply be dismantled without creating dangerous power vacuums in the provinces. Within 3 years of the restoration, fundamental disagreements between Emperor Go-Daigo and Ashikaga Takauji led to open warfare that would divide Japan for the next 60 years. The emperor's vision of restored imperial authority conflicted irreconcilably with Takauji's understanding of practical political necessities and the legitimate interests of the warrior class. This conflict transcended simple personal ambition to represent competing philosophies about the proper structure of Japanese government and society. The resulting civil war, known as the Nanbokucho or Northern and Southern Courts period, created a unique situation in Japanese history where 2 separate imperial courts claimed legitimate authority simultaneously. Emperor Go-Daigo and his successors established their court in the mountainous region of Yoshino, while Ashikaga Takauji installed a rival emperor in Kyoto and established a new military government based in the Muromachi district of the capital. This division of imperial authority had profound implications for samurai culture and political development. Warrior families found themselves forced to choose between competing sources of legitimacy, creating complex networks of alliance and rivalry that extended far beyond traditional clan loyalties. The presence of 2 imperial courts meant that both sides could claim divine sanction for their actions, intensifying the religious and ceremonial aspects of samurai warfare. The warfare itself evolved significantly during this period, reflecting both technological innovations and changing social conditions. The introduction of foot soldiers known as ashigaru began to alter the traditionally aristocratic character of samurai combat. These common soldiers, equipped with spears and later firearms, could be trained more quickly and maintained more cheaply than mounted samurai, gradually changing the economics and tactics of medieval warfare. Simultaneously, castle architecture underwent revolutionary changes as military engineers developed increasingly sophisticated defensive systems. The simple hilltop fortifications of earlier periods gave way to complex multi-tiered structures that incorporated advanced principles of defensive design. These new castles required substantial investment and ongoing maintenance, creating economic incentives for territorial consolidation and more efficient resource management. The prolonged nature of the Civil War created opportunities for ambitious provincial leaders to expand their territories and influence, while the central government remained preoccupied with the struggle for imperial legitimacy. Families like the Hosokawa, Hatakeyama, and Yamana used the chaos to build substantial regional power bases that would make them major players in subsequent political developments. The economic disruptions caused by constant warfare also accelerated changes in agricultural organization and commercial development. Traditional estate systems began breaking down as local warriors seized direct control of land and resources, while the growth of local markets and craft production created new sources of wealth that were independent of traditional aristocratic patronage. Buddhist institutions played crucial roles throughout this period of conflict, often serving as centers of military organization and political resistance. The great monasteries of Mount Hiei and Nara possessed substantial military capabilities and extensive landholdings that made them significant political actors in their own right. The complex relationships between warrior families and religious institutions created additional layers of alliance and obligation that further complicated the political landscape. The eventual reunification of the imperial courts in 1392 under Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, marked the beginning of a new phase in samurai development. The third Ashikaga shogun successfully negotiated the absorption of the southern court into the northern court, ending the formal division of imperial authority while establishing the Muromachi Bakufu as the legitimate military government of Japan. However, this political reunification masked deeper structural problems that would plague the Ashikaga government throughout its existence. The shogun's authority remained largely theoretical outside the immediate vicinity of Kyoto, while powerful provincial families had used the chaos of the Civil War period to establish semi-autonomous domains that acknowledged central authority only when convenient. The Muromachi period, spanning from 1338 to 1573, represented both the height of classical samurai culture and the beginning of its fundamental transformation. The Ashikaga shoguns established their government in Kyoto itself, creating unprecedented opportunities for interaction between military and court cultures. This proximity led to remarkable cultural synthesis, as samurai absorbed aristocratic aesthetic sensibilities while contributing their own values of discipline and practical efficiency. The development of the tea ceremony during this period exemplifies this cultural fusion. What began as a simple Buddhist ritual evolved into an elaborate aesthetic practice that emphasized harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. Samurai participation in tea ceremony culture reflected their growing sophistication and their recognition that cultural accomplishment was as important as military prowess for political success. Similarly, the refinement of flower arrangement, poetry composition, and landscape garden design during the Muromachi period demonstrated the breadth of samurai cultural interests. These artistic pursuits were not mere leisure activities, but integral components of the diplomatic and political processes that characterized medieval Japanese governance. A samurai's ability to compose appropriate poetry or arrange flowers with proper seasonal sensitivity could be as important as his military reputation in determining his political influence. The economic foundations of Muromachi samurai society also underwent significant changes as commercial activity expanded and monetization increased throughout Japan. The growth of local markets, the development of merchant guilds, and the expansion of maritime trade created new sources of wealth that ambitious warriors could tap through taxation, investment, or direct participation in commercial ventures. The introduction of firearms by Portuguese traders in 1543 marked the beginning of another revolutionary transformation in samurai warfare and society. These new weapons, initially called Tanegashima after the island where they were first encountered, offered significant advantages in terms of range and penetrating power compared to traditional weapons. However, their adoption also raised profound questions about the nature of honorable combat and the role of individual skill versus technological superiority. The rapid spread of firearms technology throughout Japan demonstrated the samurai's characteristic adaptability and their willingness to embrace innovations that enhance their military effectiveness. Within decades of their introduction, Japanese artisans had not only mastered the production of firearms, but had begun developing improvements to their design and manufacturing processes. As the 15th century progressed into the 16th, the combination of weak central authority, powerful regional domains, technological innovation, and economic change created conditions for the massive civil wars that would define the Sengoku or Warring States period. This era would test every aspect of samurai culture and society, while producing some of the most remarkable leaders and dramatic events in Japanese history. The stage was now set for an age of almost constant warfare that would see the rise and fall of numerous military leaders, the development of increasingly sophisticated military technologies and tactics, and ultimately the emergence of three successive unifiers who would reshape Japan into a unified and peaceful nation. The samurai were about to enter their most turbulent and transformative period, emerging from it fundamentally changed in their role, organization, and relationship to Japanese society. Society, The Sengoku period, stretching from 1467 to 1615, erupted like a violent storm across Japan's landscape, transforming the samurai from court-influenced warriors into hardened veterans of perpetual conflict. This age of warring states began with the Onin War, a succession dispute that devastated Kyoto and shattered the remaining authority of the Ashikaga shogunate. As the capital burned and central government collapsed, ambitious daimyo across the archipelago seized the opportunity to expand their domains through conquest and cunning. Picture the smoke rising from countless battlefields as warlords carved their territories from the chaos, each seeking to become the supreme military leader of Japan. The traditional bonds of loyalty that had held samurai society together for centuries began dissolving under the pressure of constant warfare and shifting alliances. Brothers fought brothers, sons betrayed fathers, and ancient clan loyalties crumbled before the relentless pursuit of power and survival. During this tumultuous era, the concept of Gekkokujo, or the lower overthrowing the higher, became a defining characteristic of Japanese politics. Clever and ambitious warriors could rise from humble origins to command vast armies and rule entire provinces through military skill and political acumen. The rigid social hierarchies of earlier periods gave way to a more fluid system where merit, cunning, and battlefield success determined advancement more than birthright or traditional status. The transformation of warfare itself during the Sengoku period revolutionized samurai military culture in ways that would have been unimaginable to their Heian ancestors. Armies grew from hundreds to tens of thousands as daimyo mobilized entire populations for military campaigns. The Ashigaru foot soldiers evolved from auxiliary troops into the backbone of military forces, equipped with long spears called yari that could neutralize the traditional advantage of mounted samurai warriors. Castle construction reached unprecedented levels of sophistication as military engineers developed defensive systems capable of withstanding both traditional siege warfare and the new threat posed by firearms. The great castles of this period, rising like stone mountains from strategic hilltops and river plains, represented massive investments in both defensive capability and political prestige. These fortifications required years to construct and armies of workers to maintain, creating economic incentives for territorial expansion and administrative efficiency. The introduction and rapid proliferation of firearms fundamentally altered the nature of samurai combat. The matchlock rifles, continuously improved by Japanese smiths, could penetrate traditional armor at ranges far exceeding those of bows and arrows. This technological revolution forced warriors to adapt their tactics, armor design, and battlefield formations, while grappling with philosophical questions about honor and individual prowess in an age of mass firepower. Oda Nobunaga emerged from this chaos as perhaps the most innovative and ruthless military leader of the period. Born into a minor branch of a relatively insignificant clan in Owari province, Nobunaga demonstrated the kind of strategic brilliance and willingness to break traditional conventions that characterize successful Sengoku leaders. His early victory at the Battle of Okehazama in 1560, where his small force defeated the much larger army of Imagawa Yoshimoto through surprise tactics and superior intelligence, announced his arrival as a major power in central Japan. Nobunaga's approach to warfare and politics represented a radical departure from traditional samurai values and methods. He embraced new technologies with enthusiasm, creating some of the first large-scale firearm units in Japanese military history. His troops carried thousands of matchlock rifles organized into coordinated volleys that could devastate traditional cavalry charges and infantry formations. This technological innovation gave him decisive advantages over more conservative opponents who clung to traditional fighting methods. Perhaps more significantly, Nobunaga demonstrated unprecedented ruthlessness in dealing with religious and political opposition. His systematic destruction of Buddhist military strongholds, including the massacre at Mount Hiei and the decade-long siege of the Ishiyama Honganji, shocked contemporaries with their thoroughness and brutality. These campaigns reflected his understanding that religious institutions had become political and military obstacles to unification, rather than sources of spiritual guidance. The economic policies implemented in Nobunaga's territories also revealed his innovative approach to governance and administration. He abolished traditional guilds and monopolies that restricted commercial activity, implemented standardized weights and measures, and encouraged free markets that stimulated economic growth. These reforms generated the revenue necessary to support his expanding military forces, while creating prosperity that attracted skilled artisans and merchants to his domains. Nobunaga's treatment of foreign influences further demonstrated his pragmatic approach to political and military challenges. He welcomed Portuguese missionaries and traders, recognizing the potential value of European knowledge and technology for his military campaigns. His protection of Christian missionaries and converts served both diplomatic purposes and practical goals, as the Europeans provided access to advanced military technologies and global trade networks. The alliance system that Nobunaga constructed during his rise to power illustrated the complex political calculations required for success during the Sengoku period. His partnerships with Tokugawa Ieyasu and other regional leaders required careful balancing of mutual interests and competing ambitions. These alliances provided essential military support during crucial campaigns, while creating obligations and dependencies that would influence Japanese politics for generations. Nobunaga's cultural patronage revealed another dimension of his leadership that extended beyond mere military conquest. He supported traditional arts like the tea ceremony and no theatre, while encouraging innovations in castle architecture and urban planning. His construction of Azuchi Castle represented a revolutionary fusion of defensive functionality and aesthetic grandeur that established new standards for daimyo residences throughout Japan. The assassination of Nobunaga by Akechi Mitsuhide in 1582 at the Honnoji Temple created a succession crisis that threatened to plunge Japan back into complete chaos. However, Toyotomi Hideyoshi's rapid response to this emergency demonstrated the kind of political and military skill that characterized the era's most successful leaders. Within days of learning about his lord's death, Hideyoshi had concluded a hasty peace with his current enemies, marched his army back to the capital region, and defeated Akechi's forces at the Battle of Yamazaki. Hideyoshi's background as the son of a farmer who had risen through the ranks to become one of Nobunaga's most trusted generals embodied the social mobility that characterized the Sengoku period. His success demonstrated that talent and ambition could overcome the traditional barriers of birth and social status that had previously limited advancement within samurai society. This meritocratic aspect of Sengoku politics created opportunities for exceptional individuals while destabilizing traditional hierarchies. The continuation of Nobunaga's unification campaign under Hideyoshi's leadership required adapting strategies and policies to changing circumstances and different regional challenges. Hideyoshi's campaigns in Kyushu against the Shimazu clan and his conquest of the Hojo domains in eastern Japan demonstrated his ability to coordinate massive military operations across vast distances while maintaining political control over previously conquered territories. Hideyoshi's administrative innovations during his rise to supreme power established many of the institutional foundations that would characterize early modern Japanese government. His comprehensive land surveys provided accurate information about agricultural productivity and population distribution that enabled more efficient taxation and resource allocation. The separation of samurai from farming populations through his sword hunts and class legislation created clearer social boundaries while consolidating military power under daimyo authority. The foreign policy ambitions that culminated in Hideyoshi's invasions of Korea represented both the logical extension of his domestic success and a fundamental miscalculation about Japan's military capabilities and international position. The campaigns of 1592 and 1597 revealed the limitations of even the most sophisticated Sengoku military forces when faced with the logistical challenges of overseas warfare and the determined resistance of Korean defenders supported by Ming Chinese reinforcements. The Korean campaigns also demonstrated how the prolonged warfare of the Sengoku period had created a military class capable of extraordinary feats of organization, logistics, and tactical innovation. Japanese forces initially achieved remarkable successes against Korean defenders, capturing Seoul and advancing deep into the peninsula within months of the initial invasion. However, the subsequent guerrilla warfare and Chinese intervention revealed the challenges of maintaining extended supply lines and controlling hostile populations. The experiences of individual samurai during these overseas campaigns provide fascinating insights into how the warrior class adapted to unfamiliar environments and military challenges. Letters and diaries from participants reveal both the excitement of conquest and the hardships of campaigning in foreign territory. Many warriors encountered new weapons, tactics, and cultural practices that broadened their understanding of warfare and diplomacy beyond their previous Japanese experience. Hideyoshi's death in 1598 created another succession crisis that ultimately led to the final phase of the unification process under Tokugawa Ieyasu. The complex political maneuvering that preceded the decisive Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 illustrated how the relationships and alliances forged during decades of Sengoku warfare continued to influence political calculations, even as the era of constant conflict drew to a close. The battle itself, lasting only 6 hours on a misty morning in central Japan, effectively determined the political future of the entire nation. Tokugawa's careful preparation, superior intelligence, and successful negotiations with potential opponents created conditions for victory that extended far beyond the tactical dispositions of the armies involved. The defection of key Western Army commanders during the crucial moments of combat demonstrated how personal relationships and political calculations could prove more decisive than military prowess. The establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate following Sekigahara marked not just another change of government, but a fundamental transformation in the role and character of the samurai class. The new regime would implement policies designed to prevent future civil wars, while maintaining the social and cultural prominence of the warrior class. This transformation would challenge traditional samurai identity and purpose in ways that required adaptation as profound as any they had previously experienced. As the violent Sengoku period drew to its close, the samurai found themselves victorious in their quest for national unification, but facing an uncertain future in a pacified Japan. The skills, institutions, and cultural values that had served them during centuries of warfare would now be tested in an era of peace, administrative governance, and social stability. The next phase of their evolution would prove as challenging and transformative as any period in their remarkable history. The dawn of the Edo period in 1603 brought with it a transformation so profound that it would fundamentally alter the very essence of what it meant to be samurai. Tokugawa Ieyasu's victory at Sekigahara had not merely established a new government. It had created the conditions for an unprecedented social experiment that would last for over 2.5 centuries. As morning mist cleared from the ancient capital of Edo, now renamed Tokyo, a new chapter in samurai history began to unfold, one that would challenge every assumption about warrior identity and purpose. Picture yourself walking through the carefully planned streets of this emerging city, where former battlefield commanders now served as urban administrators, where sword-wielding warriors had become bureaucrats, wielding brushes and calculating devices. The sounds of warfare had given way to the gentle rustle of silk garments in government offices, the scratch of quills on rice paper, and the measured cadence of formal court ceremonies that would regulate the rhythm of samurai life for generations to come. The genius of Tokugawa governance lay not in the destruction of the samurai class, but in its complete transformation and integration into a peaceful administrative system. Ieyasu and his successors understood that the warrior class possessed invaluable skills in leadership, organization, and discipline that could be redirected toward the challenges of governing a unified nation. Rather than eliminating potential threats, they chose to co-opt and redirect the energies that had previously driven centuries of civil conflict. The Sankin Kotai system, perhaps the most ingenious political innovation of the early Edo period, required all daimyo to maintain residences in Edo and spend alternate years attending the shogun's court. This policy effectively transformed potential military rivals into courtiers, whose wealth and energy were channeled into elaborate displays of cultural refinement rather than military preparation. The great processions that accompanied these mandatory relocations became spectacular demonstrations of peaceful competition, where daimyo competed through the magnificence of their retinues rather than the prowess of their armies. These processions, stretching for miles along the great highways that connected Edo to the provinces, created a mobile theatre of samurai culture that impressed both participants and observers with its grandeur and organization. Thousands of retainers, dressed in elaborate liveries and carrying the ceremonial implements of their lords, transformed the practical necessity of travel into artistic performances that celebrated hierarchy, loyalty, and aesthetic sophistication. The economic implications of the Sankin Kotai system extended far beyond its political purposes, creating a massive circulation of wealth and resources that stimulated commercial development throughout Japan. The constant movement of daimyo households required extensive support, networks of inns, restaurants, craftsmen, and service providers that generated prosperity for merchant classes, while creating economic dependencies that further reinforce political stability. Within this transformed political landscape, individual samurai found their daily lives regulated by increasingly elaborate codes of conduct and social expectations. The Bakufu government issued detailed regulations governing everything from clothing styles and housing construction to marriage arrangements and recreational activities. These rules served both practical and symbolic purposes, maintaining social order while reinforcing the distinctive identity of the warrior class within the broader population. The educational requirements imposed upon samurai during the Edo period reflected the government's understanding that effective administration required intellectual as well as military capabilities. Domain schools, known as hanko, became centers of learning where young samurai studied Chinese classics, Japanese literature, mathematics, and the practical skills necessary for bureaucratic service. These institutions created a highly literate and intellectually sophisticated warrior class whose capabilities extended far beyond traditional martial accomplishments. The curriculum within these schools emphasized not only academic subjects, but also moral and ethical development based on Confucian principles that had been adapted to Japanese circumstances. The concept of Bushido, the way of the warrior, evolved during this period from a collection of martial traditions into a comprehensive philosophical system that addressed questions of duty, loyalty, personal conduct, and social responsibility. This philosophical development represented one of the most significant cultural achievements of the Edo period, as scholar warriors like Yamaga Soko and Yamamoto Tsunetomo articulated systematic approaches to warrior ethics that transcended mere military considerations. Their writings explored fundamental questions about the purpose of life, the nature of service, and the relationship between individual desires and social obligations that continue to influence Japanese culture today. The economic position of samurai during the Edo period created both opportunities and challenges that would profoundly influence their social development. The stipend system, which provided warriors with regular rice allowances based on their rank and service, created financial security, but also imposed limitations on economic advancement through traditional commercial activities. This arrangement protected samurai from the uncertainties of market fluctuations, while restricting their ability to accumulate wealth through entrepreneurial ventures. Many samurai families found creative ways to supplement their official stipends through various forms of economic activity that skirted the formal prohibitions against commercial involvement. Some engaged in craft production, creating high-quality goods that could be sold through merchant intermediaries. Others provided tutoring services, wrote commercially successful literature, or developed technical innovations that generated income while maintaining their social status. The urban culture that flourished in Edo during the 18th century provided samurai with unprecedented opportunities for cultural and intellectual engagement. The pleasure quarters, theatre districts, and commercial centres of the growing city created spaces where warriors could interact with merchants, artisans, and entertainers in ways that would have been impossible during earlier periods of rigid social segregation. The development of popular literature, particularly the genre known as ukiyo-zoshi, or tales of the floating world, often featured samurai characters navigating the complexities of urban life. These stories explored themes of duty versus desire, traditional values versus modern temptations, and the challenges of maintaining warrior identity in peaceful circumstances. The popularity of such literature reflected widespread interest in the psychological and social tensions that characterized samurai experience during this period of transition. Kabuki theatre emerged as another significant cultural venue where samurai themes and values were explored and debated through dramatic performance. The great actor families developed repertoires of plays that examined historical events, legendary heroes, and contemporary social issues through the lens of warrior culture. These performances served both as entertainment and as vehicles for cultural reflection on the meaning and relevance of traditional samurai ideals. The artistic accomplishments of samurai during the Edo period extended well beyond literature and theatre to encompass virtually every aspect of Japanese cultural life. Many warriors became accomplished poets, painters, calligraphers, and masters of various traditional arts. The tea ceremony, flower arrangement, and garden design all benefited from samurai patronage and participation, as these practices provided outlets for aesthetic expression and spiritual development that complemented their administrative duties. The relationship between samurai culture and religious practice underwent significant evolution during the Edo period as the government implemented policies designed to regulate and control religious activities. The temple registration system required all Japanese to affiliate with Buddhist temples, creating formal religious structures that paralleled political hierarchies. Samurai families often developed close relationships with particular temples that served both spiritual and social functions within their communities. Zen Buddhism continued to hold special appeal for many samurai, as its emphasis on discipline, meditation, and the cultivation of mental clarity aligned well with warrior values and practical needs. However, the peaceful conditions of the Edo period allowed for the exploration of other Buddhist traditions, Confucian philosophy, and even Neo-Shinto, thought that offered different approaches to spiritual development and ethical conduct. The technological and scientific interests that emerged among educated samurai during the later Edo period reflected their intellectual curiosity and practical orientation toward problem-solving. Many warriors became accomplished mathematicians, astronomers, engineers, and natural philosophers whose work contributed significantly to Japanese intellectual development. The Rangaku, or Dutch learning movement, attracted numerous samurai scholars who studied European scientific and medical knowledge through Dutch sources available at Nagasaki. These scholarly pursuits often had practical applications that benefited both individual domains and the broader society. Samurai engineers designed improved irrigation systems, developed new agricultural techniques, and created innovations in manufacturing processes that increased productivity and prosperity. Their combination of traditional Japanese values with foreign knowledge created a unique synthesis that would prove crucial for Japan's later modernization efforts. The military traditions of the samurai class were carefully preserved during the Edo period through the development of formal martial arts schools known as ryu. These institutions maintained traditional fighting techniques while adapting them to the peaceful circumstances of contemporary life. The emphasis shifted from practical battlefield effectiveness to character development, physical conditioning, and the preservation of cultural heritage. The various weapons arts, including swordsmanship, archery, spearfighting, and unarmed combat, became highly sophisticated systems of physical and mental training that attracted practitioners from throughout society. The philosophical dimensions of these practices emphasize self-improvement, respect for tradition, and the cultivation of spiritual awareness that transcended mere technical proficiency. The social relationships within samurai families evolved significantly during the Edo period as the demands of military service gave way to the requirements of bureaucratic administration. Family structures became more stable and predictable, allowing for greater attention to education, cultural development, and long-term planning. The role of women within samurai households, while still constrained by traditional expectations, often involved significant responsibilities for household management and family finances. The marriage patterns among samurai families reflected both traditional concerns about bloodline and political alliance, as well as new considerations related to administrative competence and cultural sophistication. The education of samurai daughters often included literacy, artistic accomplishments, and household management skills that prepared them for their roles as wives and mothers within the warrior class. As the 18th century progressed into the 19th, various internal and external pressures began to challenge the stability of the Edo system and force reconsideration of traditional samurai roles and values. Economic difficulties, social tensions, and the growing awareness of foreign technological and military capabilities created conditions for the dramatic changes that would ultimately transform Japan once again. The arrival of Commodore Perry's black ships in 1853 would mark the beginning of the end for the peaceful world that the Tokugawa had created, forcing the samurai to confront once again the challenges of rapid change and external threats that would test every aspect of their cultural identity and social organization. The skills, values, and institutions they had developed during 2.5 centuries of peace would soon be tested in ways that would determine not only their own survival, but the future direction of their entire civilization. The tremors of change that would reshape samurai society began as whispers in the corridors of power during the 1840s, when reports of foreign ships prowling Japan's coastal waters reached the ears of concerned officials in Edo Castle. These mysterious vessels, with their towering masts and billowing smoke, represented technological capabilities that far exceeded anything in the Japanese arsenal. The comfortable isolation that had protected Japan for over 2 centuries was slowly cracking under the pressure of global forces that could no longer be ignored. Within the domains scattered across the archipelago, younger samurai began questioning the wisdom of continued isolation as economic pressures mounted and social tensions increased. The rigid class system that had maintained stability for generations now seemed to stifle the very innovation and adaptability that Japan would need to survive in a rapidly changing world. Rice stipends that had once provided comfortable security for warrior families were becoming inadequate as commercial activity expanded and prices fluctuated beyond government control. The intellectual ferment brewing within samurai educational institutions reflected these growing concerns about Japan's position relative to the outside world. Students of Dutch learning shared forbidden knowledge about Western military technologies, political systems, and economic theories that challenged fundamental assumptions about Japanese superiority and self-sufficiency. These underground discussions planted seeds of doubt about traditional policies while fostering new ideas about necessary reforms and adaptations. The domains of Satsuma and Choshu emerged as centers of progressive thinking, where forward-looking daimyo encouraged their retainers to study foreign knowledge and develop new approaches to governance and military organization. These Han became laboratories for experimentation with Western technologies and administrative methods while maintaining outward conformity to Tokugawa regulations. The samurai of these domains developed expertise in artillery, naval warfare, and modern military tactics that would prove crucial in coming conflicts. The financial crisis that gripped many domains during the 1850s forced creative solutions that challenged traditional economic arrangements. Some daimyo began allowing their samurai retainers to engage directly in commercial activities, breaking down barriers that had previously separated warrior and merchant classes. Others implemented administrative reforms that emphasized merit over hereditary status, creating opportunities for talented individuals regardless of their family backgrounds. The arrival of Commodore Matthew Perry's squadron in Edo Bay during July 1853 shattered the illusion of invulnerability that had sustained Japanese isolation for centuries. The massive steam-powered warships, bristling with cannons and capable of moving against wind and current, demonstrated technological superiority that could not be denied or dismissed. The thunderous sound of their guns during demonstration firings echoed across the water like pronouncements of a new age dawning. Perry's demands for trade agreements and diplomatic relations forced Japanese leaders to confront the reality that their traditional policies of exclusion were no longer viable. The treaties that followed opened Japanese ports to foreign commerce while granting extraterritorial rights to Western nationals that many samurai viewed as humiliating compromises of national sovereignty. These agreements created deep divisions within the warrior class between those who advocated accommodation with foreign powers and those who demanded resistance regardless of the consequences. The political crisis that erupted following the signing of these unequal treaties revealed fundamental weaknesses within the Tokugawa system that had been masked by centuries of peaceful stability. The shogunate's inability to resist foreign demands effectively undermined its legitimacy while creating opportunities for opposition forces that had been suppressed since the establishment of military rule. Imperial loyalists began advocating for the restoration of direct rule under the emperor as the only means of recovering national independence and dignity. The slogan "Sonno Joy," meaning revere the emperor and expel the barbarians, became a rallying cry for young samurai who combined traditional reverence for imperial authority with passionate opposition to foreign encroachment. These activists, many from lower-ranking warrior families, demonstrated remarkable courage and dedication as they organized resistance movements despite facing severe government persecution. Their willingness to sacrifice their lives for political principles created a new model of samurai commitment that transcended mere loyalty to individual lords. The assassination campaigns that terrorized foreign residents and Japanese officials during the early 1860s reflected the desperation of samurai extremists who saw violence as the only means of expressing their opposition to unwanted changes. These attacks, while politically ineffective, demonstrated the depth of emotional investment that many warriors felt in preserving traditional values and institutions. The perpetrators often composed death poems before their missions, treating their actions as forms of religious sacrifice rather than mere political terrorism. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 represented the culmination of 15 years of political upheaval that had transformed Japan from an isolated feudal society into a nation determined to achieve equality with Western powers through rapid modernization. The young samurai who engineered this revolution understood that preserving Japanese independence required abandoning many traditional practices while adapting foreign technologies and institutional forms to serve Japanese purposes. Emperor Meiji's charter oath proclaimed the new government's commitment to seeking knowledge throughout the world and establishing deliberative assemblies based on public discussion. These principles represented revolutionary departures from traditional Japanese political practice while reflecting the influence of Western democratic ideas on reform-minded samurai. The emphasis on merit-based advancement and open debate challenged hierarchical assumptions that had governed Japanese society for centuries. The abolition of the Han system in 1871 eliminated the traditional domains that had formed the basic units of samurai identity and loyalty for over 7 centuries. Former daimyo became governors appointed by the central government, while their retainers faced uncertain futures in a rapidly changing administrative structure. This transformation required enormous psychological adjustments, as warriors who had defined themselves through service to particular lords suddenly found themselves citizens of a unified nation. The elimination of samurai class privileges during the early 1870s completed the legal dismantling of the feudal system while creating new challenges for former warriors seeking roles within modern society. The commutation of rice stipends into government bonds provided temporary financial support, but eliminated the economic security that had sustained warrior families for generations. Many samurai found themselves forced to seek employment in occupations that their ancestors would have considered beneath their dignity. The prohibition on wearing swords in public, implemented in 1876, struck at the very heart of samurai identity by removing the most visible symbol of their warrior status. The katana had represented not merely a weapon, but a spiritual connection to ancestral traditions and personal honor that transcended practical considerations. The government's decision to eliminate this privilege reflected its determination to create legal equality, while demonstrating the extent of social transformation required for modernization. The Satsuma Rebellion of 1877 represented the last major armed resistance to Meiji reforms by traditional samurai who refused to accept the elimination of their privileged status. Saigo Takamori, one of the architects of the Restoration, led this final uprising when his efforts to preserve samurai military traditions conflicted with the government's commitment to creating a modern conscript army. The rebellion's defeat by peasant soldiers equipped with modern weapons symbolically marked the end of samurai military dominance. The tragic beauty of Saigo's final stand at Shiroyama captured the imagination of contemporaries and later generations who saw in his defeat the end of an entire way of life. The rebel leader's death by seppuku, performed according to ancient traditions, while government artillery shells exploded around him, created a powerful image of honor, preserved even in the face of inevitable defeat. This romantic interpretation of the rebellion's conclusion helped establish Saigo as a folk hero whose memory would influence Japanese nationalism for decades. The transformation of former samurai into leaders of Japan's modernization efforts demonstrated the adaptability and intellectual capabilities that had characterized their class throughout its long history. Many warriors became successful entrepreneurs, educators, military officers, and government officials who applied traditional values of loyalty and discipline to new challenges. Their contributions to building modern institutions reflected both their educational advantages and their commitment to serving national rather than merely personal interests. The establishment of modern schools and universities provided former samurai with opportunities to acquire the knowledge and skills necessary for success in an industrializing society. The emphasis on Western learning, combined with traditional Japanese moral education, created a distinctive synthesis that would influence Japanese intellectual development throughout the modern period. Many educators who shaped these institutions were former warriors, who understood the importance of adapting foreign knowledge to serve Japanese cultural and political purposes. The development of modern Japanese military forces drew heavily upon samurai traditions while incorporating Western organizational principles and technological innovations. Former warriors who joined the new army and navy brought with them concepts of honor, discipline, and sacrifice that became integral components of modern Japanese military culture. The fusion of traditional warrior values with modern military science created armed forces that would play crucial roles in Japan's emergence as a regional power. The industrial enterprises that emerged during the early Meiji period often involved former samurai who applied their organizational skills and social connections to business ventures. Some established trading companies that facilitated Japan's integration into global commercial networks, while others founded manufacturing enterprises that competed successfully with foreign imports. Their success in adapting to commercial activities demonstrated the flexibility that had enabled their class to survive previous periods of dramatic change. The political leadership of Meiji Japan drew extensively upon former samurai who had participated in the Restoration movement and understood both the necessity of reform and the importance of maintaining cultural continuity. These leaders crafted policies that promoted rapid modernization while preserving essential elements of Japanese identity and social cohesion. Their ability to balance competing pressures reflected the sophisticated political skills that had developed during centuries of complex feudal governance. The cultural contributions of former samurai to modern Japanese society extended far beyond their roles in politics and business to encompass education, literature, and the preservation of traditional arts. Many became teachers who transmitted classical learning to new generations, while others wrote novels and essays that explored the psychological and social challenges of rapid modernization. Their efforts to maintain cultural traditions while embracing necessary changes helped create the distinctive character of modern Japanese civilization. The international careers of former samurai reflected Japan's emergence as a participant in global diplomatic and commercial networks. Some became ambassadors and diplomatic officials who represented Japanese interests abroad, while others pursued educational opportunities in Western universities that equipped them to contribute to Japan's modernization efforts. Their experiences overseas provided valuable insights into foreign societies, while strengthening their appreciation for distinctively Japanese values and institutions. The legacy of the samurai class extended far beyond its formal abolition to influence Japanese society, culture, and politics throughout the modern period. The values of loyalty, discipline, honor, and service that had characterized warrior culture became integral components of modern Japanese identity, adapted to serve new circumstances while maintaining essential continuity with traditional ideals. The transformation of the samurai demonstrated both the possibility of dramatic social change and the persistence of cultural values that transcend particular institutional arrangements. As Japan entered the 20th century as a modern industrial nation, the influence of former samurai remained visible in every aspect of society, from business and politics to education and the arts. Their successful adaptation to new circumstances, while preserving essential cultural values, provided a model for later generations facing similar challenges of change and adaptation. The samurai story had not ended with the Meiji Restoration, but had evolved into a new chapter that would continue to unfold throughout Japan's modern history. The echoes of samurai culture resonated through Japan's rapid transformation from feudal society to modern nation-state, creating distinctive patterns of development that distinguish Japanese modernization from Western models. The fusion of traditional values with modern institutions demonstrated the possibility of preserving cultural identity while embracing necessary technological and social changes. This synthesis would continue to influence Japanese society as it faced new challenges and opportunities in an increasingly interconnected world. The international recognition that Japan achieved during the late 19th and early 20th centuries reflected not only its successful modernization, but also the distinctive character that former samurai had helped create within modern Japanese institutions. Their contributions to building a strong, independent nation validated their ancestors' sacrifices, while demonstrating the continued relevance of warrior values in peaceful pursuits. The samurai tradition had been transformed rather than destroyed, continuing to shape Japanese society in ways both subtle and profound as the nation moved confidently into the modern era. Dently into the modern era. The philosophical foundations that former samurai carried into modern Japanese society reflected centuries of accumulated wisdom about leadership, service, and moral responsibility that transcended the specific circumstances of their warrior origins. These men had been trained from childhood to think beyond immediate self-interest, to consider the long-term consequences of their actions, and to prioritize collective welfare over personal advantage. Such intellectual habits proved invaluable as Japan navigated the complex challenges of international diplomacy and domestic development during the turbulent decades following the Restoration. The educational institutions that emerged during the late 19th century bore the distinctive imprint of samurai pedagogical traditions, emphasizing character development alongside academic achievement in ways that created uniquely Japanese approaches to learning and intellectual growth. Former warriors who became educators understood that true knowledge required not merely the accumulation of facts, but the cultivation of wisdom, judgment, and moral sensitivity that would enable graduates to serve society effectively. Their classrooms became laboratories for synthesizing Eastern and Western intellectual traditions while maintaining distinctively Japanese approaches to ethical development and social responsibility. The business enterprises established by former samurai during the early Meiji period demonstrated remarkable innovation in adapting traditional concepts of loyalty and obligation to commercial relationships and industrial organization. These entrepreneurs created company cultures that emphasized long-term stability over short-term profits, worker welfare over pure efficiency, and collective success over individual advancement. Their approach to business relationships reflected samurai understanding of mutual obligation and reciprocal responsibility that had governed feudal social structures for centuries. The zaibatsu conglomerates that dominated Japanese industry during the late 19th and early 20th centuries often trace their origins to samurai founders who applied traditional organizational principles to modern commercial ventures. These industrial empires combined centralized strategic direction with decentralized operational authority in ways that reflected feudal administrative practices while incorporating Western technological and financial innovations. The loyalty networks that bound employees to their companies often resembled the personal relationships that had characterized samurai service to their lords. The diplomatic corps that represented Japan in international forums during this period included numerous former samurai whose understanding of protocol, hierarchy, and ceremonial behavior proved invaluable in navigating the complex etiquette of 19th century international relations. Their training in classical literature and philosophy provided them with sophisticated frameworks for understanding foreign cultures while maintaining Japanese dignity and independence. These ambassadors and diplomatic officials successfully established Japan's credibility as a civilized nation worthy of equal treatment by Western powers. The military academies established during the Meiji period created systematic approaches to officer training that combined Western military science with traditional Japanese concepts of honor, loyalty, and sacrifice. Former samurai who served as instructors in these institutions transmitted not merely tactical knowledge, but philosophical understanding of military service as a sacred calling that transcended mere professional obligation. Their influence shaped generations of officers who would lead Japan through the challenges of regional conflicts and global warfare. The literary renaissance that flourished during the late 19th century reflected the intellectual ferment created when traditionally educated samurai encountered Western literary forms and philosophical ideas. Writers like Fukuzawa Yukichi and Nitobe Inazo created works that explored the psychological and cultural challenges of modernization while preserving appreciation for traditional values and aesthetic sensibilities. Their novels, essays, and philosophical treatises provided frameworks for understanding rapid social change while maintaining cultural continuity and identity. The preservation of traditional arts during this period of rapid modernization owed much to former samurai who understood the importance of maintaining cultural practices that embodied essential Japanese values and aesthetic principles. Tea ceremony masters, martial arts instructors, and traditional craftsmen often came from warrior families that had cultivated these skills for generations. Their efforts to adapt ancient practices to modern circumstances ensured that essential elements of Japanese culture would survive the transition to industrial society. The religious and philosophical movements that emerged during the late 19th century reflected attempts by former samurai to reconcile traditional Japanese spiritual practices with modern scientific knowledge and Christian influences. Many warriors who had embraced Zen Buddhism or Confucian philosophy found themselves grappling with Western ideas about individual rights, democratic governance, and scientific methodology. Their synthetic approaches to these intellectual challenges created distinctive Japanese forms of modern thought that preserved essential elements of traditional wisdom. The technological innovations that enabled Japan's rapid industrialization often involved former samurai who applied their problem-solving skills and disciplined work habits to mastering foreign manufacturing processes and engineering techniques. These men understood that national independence required technological self-sufficiency, motivating them to dedicate themselves to acquiring and improving upon Western industrial methods. Their success in adapting complex technologies to Japanese conditions demonstrated the intellectual capabilities that had characterized their class throughout its history. The urban development that transformed Japanese cities during the Meiji period reflected planning principles that combined Western concepts of efficiency and hygiene with traditional Japanese understanding of harmony between human settlements and natural environments. Former samurai who became urban planners and architects created distinctive approaches to city design that accommodated modern transportation and industrial requirements while preserving aesthetic values and social relationships that had characterized traditional Japanese communities. The agricultural reforms that modernized Japanese farming during this period often involved former samurai who applied their administrative experience and educational advantages to improving rural productivity and living conditions. These men understood that national strength required a prosperous agricultural base, motivating them to study Western farming techniques while preserving sustainable practices that had supported Japanese civilization for centuries. Their efforts to bridge traditional and modern agricultural methods created models of rural development that enhanced both productivity and social stability. The banking and financial institutions that facilitated Japan's economic development drew heavily upon former samurai who possessed the mathematical skills, ethical standards, and social connections necessary for managing complex commercial transactions and investment relationships. Their understanding of trust, reputation, and long-term relationship building provided foundations for financial systems that supported rapid industrial growth while maintaining stability and public confidence. The journalism and publishing industries that emerged during this period included many former samurai who used their literary skills and cultural knowledge to inform public opinion about political developments and social changes. These writers and editors created newspapers, magazines, and books that helped ordinary Japanese citizens understand the significance of modernization while maintaining appreciation for traditional values and cultural practices. Their work facilitated democratic participation while preserving social cohesion during periods of rapid change. The women's education movements that developed during the late 19th century often involved former samurai families who understood the importance of preparing their daughters for productive roles in modern society while preserving feminine virtues and family responsibilities. These educational pioneers created schools and curricula that combined Western academic subjects with traditional Japanese accomplishments like flower arrangement, tea ceremony, and classical literature. Their approach to women's education reflected samurai understanding of the importance of cultivating both intellectual capabilities and moral character. The medical and scientific institutions that advanced Japanese knowledge during this period attracted numerous former samurai who combined traditional intellectual discipline with enthusiasm for Western scientific methods and discoveries. These scholar physicians and researchers contributed to Japan's emergence as a center of medical and scientific innovation, while maintaining holistic approaches to health and natural phenomena that reflected traditional Japanese philosophical perspectives. The legal profession that developed during the Meiji period included many former samurai who applied their understanding of justice, precedent, and social harmony to creating modern legal systems that served both individual rights and collective welfare. These lawyers and judges crafted approaches to jurisprudence that incorporated Western legal principles while preserving Japanese concepts of equity, reconciliation, and community responsibility. Their work created legal frameworks that supported modernization while maintaining social stability. The artistic movements that flourished during this period reflected attempts by former samurai to preserve traditional aesthetic values while incorporating Western techniques and perspectives. Painters, sculptors, and craftsmen from warrior families created distinctive synthetic styles that demonstrated Japanese artistic capabilities while maintaining cultural authenticity. Their works helped establish Japan's reputation as a civilization worthy of international respect and admiration. As the 19th century drew to its close, the transformation of Japanese society under the influence of former samurai had created a modern nation that successfully combined traditional values with contemporary capabilities. The institutional structures, cultural practices, and social relationships that characterized Meiji Japan reflected the wisdom, discipline, and adaptability that had enabled the warrior class to serve their society effectively throughout 8 centuries of changing circumstances. Their legacy would continue to influence Japanese development as the nation faced new challenges and opportunities in the 20th century. The international recognition that Japan achieved during this period validated the vision of those who had engineered the Meiji Restoration, while demonstrating the continued relevance of samurai values in modern circumstances. The successful synthesis of Eastern and Western elements that characterized Japanese modernization provided a model for other societies seeking to preserve their cultural identity while embracing necessary technological and institutional changes. The samurai spirit had been transformed rather than destroyed, continuing to animate Japanese society as it moved confidently toward its destiny as a major world power. Power. The dawn of the 20th century found Japan transformed beyond recognition from the isolated archipelago that had first encountered Perry's black ships half a century earlier. Former samurai had become the architects of this remarkable metamorphosis, their descendants now serving as diplomats in European capitals, industrialists building steel mills and shipyards, and military officers commanding modern armies equipped with the latest Western weapons and tactics. Yet beneath this veneer of rapid modernization, the essential spirit that had animated their warrior ancestors continued to pulse through Japanese society like an underground river, surfacing in unexpected moments and places to remind the world that some values transcend the boundaries of time and circumstance. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905 provided the ultimate test of whether Japan's modernization efforts had truly succeeded in creating a military force capable of competing with European powers on equal terms. The descendants of samurai who commanded Japanese forces brought to this conflict not merely Western military training and modern equipment, but inherited traditions of strategic thinking, personal courage, and willingness to sacrifice that had been refined through centuries of warfare. Their stunning victories at Port Arthur and Tsushima announced to the world that Japan had successfully completed its transformation from feudal society to modern nation, while demonstrating that traditional warrior virtues remained relevant in contemporary military contexts. The psychological impact of these victories extended far beyond their immediate military consequences to reshape global perceptions of Asian capabilities and Western invincibility. For the first time in modern history, an Asian nation had decisively defeated a European power in conventional warfare, shattering assumptions about racial hierarchy and technological determinism that had dominated international relations since the colonial era began. The tactical brilliance displayed by Japanese commanders reflected not merely their mastery of modern military science, but their ability to synthesize Western methods with traditional Japanese approaches to strategy and leadership. Admiral Togo's decisive naval victory at Tsushima exemplified this fusion of traditional and modern elements, as his careful preparation, patient positioning, and bold execution reflected samurai principles of thorough planning, combined with decisive action at the crucial moment. The admiral's famous signal to his fleet before the battle, declaring that the fate of the empire depended upon their efforts, echoed the kind of moral exhortation that had inspired samurai warriors for centuries, while addressing the specific tactical requirements of modern naval warfare. The economic development that accelerated following Japan's military victories created unprecedented opportunities for former samurai and their descendants to demonstrate their adaptability and entrepreneurial capabilities. The heavy industries that emerged to support military modernization required sophisticated management, technical expertise, and long-term planning that drew heavily upon traditional samurai skills in organization and administration. These industrial pioneers created companies that combined Western manufacturing techniques with Japanese approaches to worker relations and corporate culture. The educational expansion that accompanied Japan's rise to international prominence reflected continued samurai influence on pedagogical philosophy and institutional development. Universities and technical schools established during this period emphasized not merely the acquisition of practical skills, but the cultivation of character, moral sensitivity, and national consciousness that would enable graduates to serve society effectively. Former warriors who became educators understood that true learning required the integration of knowledge with wisdom, technical competence with ethical understanding. The cultural renaissance that flourished during the early 20th century demonstrated how traditional Japanese aesthetic values could enrich and be enriched by exposure to international artistic movements and philosophical currents. Writers, painters, and composers from samurai backgrounds created works that explored universal themes through distinctively Japanese sensibilities, earning international recognition while preserving cultural authenticity. Their achievements validated the belief that modernization need not require the abandonment of traditional values and cultural practices. The diplomatic corps that represented Japan during this period of international engagement included numerous descendants of samurai families who brought to their work sophisticated understanding of protocol, cultural sensitivity, and strategic thinking that enabled them to navigate complex international relationships successfully. These ambassadors and foreign ministry officials established Japan's reputation as a reliable partner and responsible member of the international community while protecting national interests and maintaining cultural dignity. The urban development that transformed Japanese cities during the early 20th century reflected planning principles that balanced efficiency with livability, progress with tradition, in ways that created distinctive approaches to metropolitan growth and architectural design. Former samurai who became urban planners and architects understood that cities must serve human needs as well as economic requirements, leading them to create spaces that facilitated both commercial activity and community relationships. The technological innovations that emerged from Japanese research institutions and industrial laboratories during this period demonstrated how traditional approaches to learning and problem-solving could accelerate the development of cutting-edge scientific and engineering capabilities. Researchers from samurai backgrounds brought to their work disciplined methodologies, collaborative approaches, and long-term perspectives that enabled them to make significant contributions to fields ranging from metallurgy and chemistry to electronics and precision manufacturing. The social movements that developed during the early 20th century reflected growing awareness among educated Japanese of their responsibilities as citizens of a modern democracy, even as their political system retained important traditional elements. Former samurai and their descendants played crucial roles in movements for social reform, women's rights, and democratic participation that sought to expand the benefits of modernization while preserving social harmony and cultural continuity. The religious and philosophical currents that influenced Japanese intellectual life during this period demonstrated remarkable synthetic capabilities as thinkers from samurai backgrounds grappled with Western ideas about individualism, progress, and scientific rationality, while maintaining appreciation for traditional spiritual practices and moral frameworks. Their efforts to reconcile apparently contradictory worldviews created distinctive Japanese approaches to modern thought that preserved essential elements of cultural identity. The military institutions that evolved during Japan's emergence as a regional power reflected continued influence of samurai traditions regarding honor, loyalty, and service, while incorporating modern organizational structures and tactical doctrines. Officer training programs emphasized character development alongside technical competence, creating military leaders who understood their responsibilities to both their immediate commands and the broader national interest. The business culture that developed within Japanese corporations during this period demonstrated how traditional concepts of mutual obligation and collective responsibility could enhance, rather than hinder, modern industrial organization. Companies founded or managed by former samurai created distinctive approaches to labor relations, corporate governance, and strategic planning that emphasized long-term stability and social responsibility alongside profitability and growth. The literary achievements of writers from samurai backgrounds during the early 20th century created works that explored the psychological and cultural dimensions of rapid social change, while preserving appreciation for traditional values and aesthetic sensibilities. Their novels, poetry, and essays provided frameworks for understanding the challenges of modernity while maintaining connections to cultural heritage and spiritual wisdom. The artistic movements that flourished during this period reflected successful fusion of traditional Japanese aesthetic principles with international styles and techniques, creating distinctive approaches to visual arts, music, and theatre that earned global recognition while preserving cultural authenticity. Artists from warrior families demonstrated how creative expression could bridge cultural boundaries while maintaining distinctive national characteristics. The scientific institutions that emerged during Japan's modernization period attracted numerous researchers from samurai backgrounds who applied traditional intellectual discipline and collaborative methodologies to advancing human knowledge in fields ranging from medicine and physics to engineering and agriculture. Their contributions to international scientific communities demonstrated Japanese capabilities while reflecting cultural values that emphasized collective benefit over individual recognition. The educational philosophy that shaped Japanese schools and universities during this period reflected samurai understanding of the relationship between knowledge and character, learning and service, individual development and social responsibility. Former warriors who became educators created curricular and pedagogical approaches that prepared students not merely for professional success, but for meaningful participation in democratic society and cultural preservation. The agricultural modernization that transformed Japanese farming during the early 20th century often involved former samurai who applied their administrative experience and scientific knowledge to improving rural productivity and living standards. These agricultural innovators understood that national strength required prosperous rural communities, motivating them to develop farming techniques and rural institutions that enhanced both economic output and social stability. The financial institutions that facilitated Japan's economic growth during this period reflected samurai understanding of trust, reputation, and long-term relationship building that provided foundations for banking and investment practices emphasizing stability and community benefit alongside profitability. Former warriors who entered finance created approaches to monetary policy and commercial lending that supported sustainable development while maintaining public confidence. The international trade relationships that Japan developed during its emergence as a modern economy reflected sophisticated understanding of cultural sensitivity, mutual benefit, and strategic patience that characterized samurai approaches to diplomacy and negotiation. Japanese merchants and trading companies established reputations for reliability and quality that opened global markets while maintaining respectful relationships with foreign partners. The transportation infrastructure that connected Japanese cities and regions during this period of rapid development reflected engineering capabilities and organizational skills that drew heavily upon traditional samurai administrative experience and technical problem-solving abilities. Former warriors who became transportation planners and engineers created systems that facilitated economic growth while preserving environmental quality and community relationships. The communication networks that emerged during Japan's modernization enabled rapid information exchange and cultural diffusion that accelerated social and economic development while maintaining national unity and cultural coherence. Former samurai who entered journalism and publishing created media institutions that informed public opinion while preserving social harmony and cultural values. As Japan entered the second decade of the 20th century, the transformation that had begun with the Meiji Restoration had created a modern nation that successfully combined traditional values with contemporary capabilities, Eastern wisdom with Western technology, cultural preservation with social progress. The legacy of the samurai class continued to influence every aspect of Japanese society, from business and politics to education and the arts, demonstrating the enduring relevance of their values and the successful adaptation of their traditions to modern circumstances. The international recognition that Japan had achieved validated the vision of those who had engineered this remarkable transformation, while providing a foundation for continued growth and development in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. The samurai spirit, refined through centuries of service and sacrifice, had found new expression in peaceful pursuits that served not merely Japanese interests, but contributed to human progress and international understanding. The philosophical foundations that emerged from this transformation would prove even more significant than the material achievements that captured international attention. Former samurai had created something unprecedented in human history, a society that maintained its spiritual core while embracing radical technological and social change. The Bushido Code, once the exclusive province of mounted warriors, evolved into a national ethos that emphasized excellence, perseverance, and collective responsibility in ways that transcended class boundaries and professional distinctions. The industrial workers who labored in the great steel mills and textile factories of early 20th century Japan carried within their hearts the same dedication to craftsmanship and group harmony that had characterized their samurai predecessors. These men and women, many descended from peasant families that had served warrior lords for generations, understood instinctively that their individual efforts contributed to a larger national purpose that demanded nothing less than their complete commitment and highest capabilities. The merchants who established trading networks spanning the Pacific Ocean operated according to principles of honor and long-term thinking that distinguished Japanese commercial practices from the purely profit-driven approaches characteristic of Western capitalism. These business pioneers viewed their enterprises not merely as vehicles for personal enrichment, but as instruments of national development and international reputation building that required the same strategic patience and moral integrity that had guided samurai governance for centuries. The scholars who filled the lecture halls of Japan's expanding universities brought to their research and teaching the same intellectual rigor and commitment to excellence that had characterized samurai education throughout the feudal period. These academics understood that knowledge without wisdom was meaningless, that learning without application served no constructive purpose, and that individual achievement meant nothing unless it contributed to collective advancement and cultural preservation. The farmers who fed this rapidly modernizing nation applied innovative agricultural techniques with the same attention to detail and respect for natural processes that had sustained Japanese civilization for millennia. These rural communities, often led by former samurai, who had returned to the land after the abolition of their class privileges, demonstrated how traditional values of harmony between human activity and environmental stewardship could enhance rather than hinder technological progress and economic development. The artists who created the distinctive aesthetic movements of the Meiji and Taisho periods drew upon spiritual wells that had nourished Japanese creativity for centuries, while embracing new materials, techniques, and themes that reflected their nation's expanding cultural horizons. These painters, sculptors, and craftsmen understood that true art must speak to universal human experiences, while preserving the particular insights and sensibilities that distinguished Japanese civilization from all others. The diplomats who represented Japan in the great capitals of the world carried themselves with dignity and grace that reflected centuries of samurai training in proper deportment and strategic thinking. These ambassadors understood that their personal conduct reflected not merely their own character, but the honor of their entire nation. motivating them to maintain standards of behavior and achievement that validated Japan's claims to equality with the established powers of the international system. The military officers who commanded Japan's modern armed forces brought to their duties the same concepts of honor, sacrifice, and strategic vision that had characterized samurai leadership throughout their long history. These professionals understood that military power served political purposes, and that victory in battle meant nothing unless it contributed to just and lasting peace that preserved their nation's independence while respecting the legitimate interests of other peoples. The engineers who designed the railways, harbors, and communication systems that connected Japan's scattered islands into a unified economic and political entity applied problem-solving methodologies that combined Western technical knowledge with traditional Japanese approaches to planning and execution. These technical specialists understood that infrastructure served human needs rather than abstract efficiency requirements, leading them to create transportation and communication networks that facilitated economic growth while preserving community relationships and environmental quality. The doctors who staffed Japan's expanding medical institutions brought to their healing work the same compassionate dedication and pursuit of excellence that had characterized samurai service throughout their history. These physicians understood that true healing required attention to spiritual as well as physical needs, leading them to develop medical practices that combined Western scientific methods with traditional Japanese understanding of the relationships between mind, body, and social environment. The teachers who educated the children of this rapidly changing society carried forward pedagogical traditions that emphasized character development alongside academic achievement in ways that prepared students for productive citizenship while preserving cultural continuity. These educators understood that learning required not merely the transmission of information, but the cultivation of wisdom, judgment, and moral sensitivity that would enable their pupils to navigate the complexities of modern life while maintaining essential human values. The journalists who informed public opinion about domestic developments and international affairs brought to their work the same commitment to truth and social responsibility that had characterized samurai intellectual traditions throughout the feudal period. These writers understood that information without context was meaningless, that facts without interpretation served no constructive purpose, and that their professional obligations extended beyond mere reporting to include education and moral guidance for their readers. The bankers, who managed the financial institutions that facilitated Japan's economic development, operated according to principles of trust and long-term relationship building that reflected samurai understanding of mutual obligation and reciprocal responsibility. These financial professionals understood that monetary systems served social purposes rather than purely economic functions, leading them to develop banking practices that supported sustainable development while maintaining public confidence and social stability. The craftsmen who produced the goods that filled Japan's expanding markets applied traditional standards of quality and aesthetic sensitivity to manufacturing processes that incorporated the latest technological innovations. These artisans understood that true craftsmanship required not merely technical skill, but spiritual dedication and respect for materials that transformed functional objects into expressions of cultural values and human creativity. The mothers who raised the next generation of Japanese citizens brought to their domestic responsibilities the same dedication to excellence and long-term thinking that had characterized samurai family traditions throughout their history. These women understood that their children's success reflected not merely individual effort, but family honor and national destiny, motivating them to provide educational and moral guidance that prepared their offspring for meaningful contributions to society while preserving essential cultural traditions. The religious leaders who guided Japan's spiritual development during this period of rapid change demonstrated remarkable ability to synthesize traditional practices with modern insights while preserving the essential wisdom that had sustained Japanese civilization through centuries of historical transformation. These priests and teachers understood that spiritual truth transcended particular cultural forms, while requiring specific practices and community relationships that connected individuals to larger purposes and eternal values. The athletes who represented Japan in international competitions brought to their training and performance the same discipline and commitment to excellence that had characterized samurai martial arts for centuries. These sportsmen understood that individual achievement reflected national honor and cultural values, motivating them to pursue perfection, while demonstrating sportsmanship and respect for opponents that validated Japan's claims to moral leadership in the international community. The musicians who created the distinctive soundscapes of modern Japan drew upon traditional melodic and rhythmic patterns while incorporating Western instruments and harmonic structures that reflected their nation's expanding cultural horizons. These composers understood that music must speak to universal human emotions, while preserving the particular insights and aesthetic sensibilities that distinguished Japanese artistic expression from all other traditions. The urban planners who designed the expanding cities that housed Japan's growing population applied principles of harmony and balance that reflected traditional Japanese understanding of proper relationships between human settlements and natural environments. These architects understood that cities must serve human needs as well as economic requirements, leading them to create urban spaces that facilitated both commercial activity and community relationships while preserving aesthetic values and environmental quality. The social reformers, who advocated for democratic participation and expanded rights, brought to their activism the same sense of moral obligation and long-term vision that had motivated samurai service throughout their history. These advocates understood that social progress required not merely institutional change, but cultural transformation that preserved essential values while adapting to new circumstances and expanded opportunities for human development. As the Taisho period gave way to the early Showa era, Japan stood as a testament to the possibility of successful cultural adaptation and national transformation that preserved essential identity while embracing necessary change. The legacy of the samurai class had been transformed rather than destroyed, continuing to animate Japanese society through new institutions and practices that served contemporary needs while maintaining connection to eternal principles and timeless wisdom. The challenges that lay ahead would test every aspect of this remarkable synthesis as Japan faced increasing international tensions and domestic pressures that demanded choices between competing values and conflicting loyalties. The spiritual resources that former samurai had bequeathed to their nation would prove crucial as Japanese leaders grappled with questions about their country's proper role in an increasingly complex and dangerous world where traditional concepts of honor and duty would be tested by unprecedented circumstances and moral dilemmas. The story of the samurai had not ended with the Meiji Restoration, but had evolved into something larger and more significant. A demonstration that human societies could preserve their deepest values while adapting to new realities, that traditional wisdom could enrich rather than hinder progress, and that the pursuit of excellence in service to others remained the highest calling available to mortal beings, regardless of the particular circumstances in which they found themselves called to serve. The spiritual foundation that the samurai had established for Japanese society would face its greatest trial during the turbulent decades that followed, as the nation grappled with unprecedented challenges that tested every aspect of their inherited wisdom and moral framework. The militaristic fervor that emerged during the 1930s represented both a continuation and a distortion of traditional warrior values, as younger generations struggled to apply ancient concepts of loyalty and sacrifice to modern geopolitical realities that their ancestors could never have imagined. The economic pressures that gripped Japan during the global depression created conditions where traditional approaches to collective responsibility and mutual support provided crucial stability while other nations descended into chaos and extremism. Communities that had been shaped by centuries of samurai governance demonstrated remarkable resilience as neighbors supported neighbors. Businesses prioritized employee welfare over pure profit maximization, and local leaders applied inherited wisdom about crisis management to navigate unprecedented challenges. Within the military academies and staff colleges where Japan's future commanders received their training, the tension between traditional Bushido principles and modern strategic requirements created complex intellectual and moral dilemmas that would shape the nation's destiny. Young officers who had grown up hearing stories of their samurai ancestors found themselves torn between inherited concepts of honorable conduct and the harsh realities of total warfare that characterized the emerging global conflict. The industrial mobilization that prepared Japan for its expanding military commitments drew upon organizational traditions and work ethics that traced their origins directly to samurai administrative practices and cultural values. Factory managers who had learned leadership principles from grandfathers who had served feudal lords applied these lessons to coordinating massive production efforts while maintaining worker morale and social cohesion under increasingly difficult circumstances. The diplomatic corps that represented Japan during this period of growing international tension included career officials whose understanding of protocol, cultural sensitivity, and strategic patience reflected generations of samurai training in the subtle arts of negotiation and relationship management. These ambassadors found themselves attempting to explain and justify policies that often conflicted with their own inherited sense of proper conduct and moral responsibility. The educational institutions that continued to shape Japanese youth during these crucial years maintained pedagogical approaches that emphasized character development alongside academic achievement, even as political pressures mounted for more narrowly focused training in technical skills and ideological conformity. Teachers who traced their intellectual lineage to samurai scholar administrators understood that true education required the cultivation of judgment and moral sensitivity that transcended immediate political requirements. The rural communities that provided both agricultural sustenance and military recruits for the expanding war effort demonstrated how traditional values of mutual support and collective responsibility could maintain social stability even under extreme stress. Village leaders who had inherited administrative wisdom from samurai predecessors applied these insights to organizing community resources while preserving essential human relationships and cultural practices. The technological innovations that emerged from Japanese research institutions during this period reflected problem-solving methodologies and collaborative approaches that drew heavily upon traditional samurai intellectual traditions while addressing urgent military and industrial requirements. Scientists and engineers who had been educated according to principles that emphasized long-term thinking and collective benefit found themselves developing capabilities that would reshape global technological development. The artistic expressions that flourished even during these dark years demonstrated how creative spirits nurtured by centuries of samurai patronage could find ways to preserve beauty and meaning while adapting to political constraints and social pressures. Writers, painters, and musicians created works that spoke to universal human experiences while maintaining distinctively Japanese sensibilities and aesthetic values. The family structures that sustained Japanese society during this period of upheaval reflected organizational patterns and value systems that had been refined through generations of samurai household management and child-rearing practices. Parents who had learned from their own mothers and fathers how to balance individual development with collective responsibility applied these lessons to preparing their children for uncertain futures while preserving essential cultural transmission. The commercial networks that connected Japanese businesses to global markets during these turbulent decades operated according to principles of trust and relationship building that had characterized samurai approaches to economic activity for centuries. Merchants and trading companies that had been founded by former warriors maintained international reputations for reliability and quality even as political tensions strained diplomatic relationships. The religious institutions that provided spiritual guidance during this period of national crisis demonstrated remarkable ability to synthesize traditional practices with contemporary needs while preserving essential wisdom about human nature and moral responsibility. Buddhist and Shinto leaders, who had inherited centuries of samurai spiritual seeking, offered frameworks for understanding suffering and sacrifice that helped ordinary people maintain dignity and hope under increasingly difficult circumstances. The medical professionals who treated both civilian and military casualties during the expanding conflicts brought to their healing work traditional Japanese understanding of the relationships between physical health and spiritual well-being. Doctors and nurses, who had been trained according to principles that emphasized compassionate service, developed treatment approaches that addressed psychological as well as physical trauma while maintaining respect for human dignity. The transportation systems that connected Japan's scattered territories and facilitated military logistics reflected engineering capabilities and organizational skills that drew directly upon traditional samurai administrative experience and strategic thinking. Railroad managers and shipping company executives who had learned planning methodologies from predecessors who had served feudal lords applied these insights to coordinating increasingly complex logistical challenges. The communication networks that enabled rapid information exchange across Japan's expanding sphere of influence operated according to principles that balanced efficiency with security while maintaining the kind of reliable service that had characterized samurai administrative traditions for centuries. Telegraph and radio operators who had been educated in values of accuracy and dedication provided the information flows that sustained both civilian governance and military coordination. The financial institutions that supported Japan's wartime economy reflected traditional understanding of the relationships between individual prosperity and collective welfare that had shaped samurai approaches to resource management throughout their history. Bankers and insurance executives who had inherited concepts of mutual obligation and long-term responsibility developed policies that sustained economic stability while supporting national mobilization efforts. The legal professionals who maintained judicial systems during this period of expanding government authority demonstrated how traditional samurai concepts of justice and social harmony could provide frameworks for preserving essential human rights even under extreme political pressures. Judges and attorneys who had been trained in values of fairness and moral courage found ways to protect innocent individuals while fulfilling their professional obligations to maintain social order. The international relationships that Japan maintained during these turbulent years reflected both the strengths and limitations of traditional samurai approaches to diplomacy and strategic alliance building. Cultural attachés and trade representatives who had learned from ancestors who had negotiated complex feudal relationships applied these skills to managing increasingly difficult international partnerships while preserving Japan's honor and independence. The agricultural research that sustained food production during wartime shortages demonstrated how traditional Japanese farming wisdom could be enhanced by scientific methods while preserving sustainable practices that had supported the nation for millennia. Agricultural scientists who had grown up in rural communities that preserved samurai administrative traditions developed techniques that increased productivity while maintaining soil health and environmental balance. The urban planning that adapted Japanese cities to wartime requirements reflected traditional understanding of community organization and resource management that enabled effective civil defense while preserving essential social relationships. City administrators who had inherited organizational wisdom from samurai urban governors applied these insights to coordinating evacuation procedures, rationing systems, and emergency services that protected civilian populations. The social service organizations that cared for war widows, orphans, and disabled veterans operated according to principles of mutual support and collective responsibility that had characterized samurai community traditions for centuries. Volunteer coordinators who had learned from families that had served feudal lords how to organize assistance for those in need applied these lessons to addressing unprecedented social challenges with limited resources. And so, as dawn breaks over modern Japan, the cherry blossoms still fall like snow across ancient temple grounds, carrying with them the whispered echoes of 8 centuries of samurai legacy. Their swords may have been silenced, their armor traded for business suits, yet the spirit of the warrior endures in every act of service, every moment of discipline, every choice to honor duty above personal desire. Sleep now, knowing that the way of the samurai lives on, not in museums or history books, but in the eternal human quest to live with purpose, serve with honor, and face each day with the quiet courage of those who came before.